let's get into this. All right. How you
Okay.
doing, Mel?
I'm doing good, Larry. Thank you for having me. This is exciting. I'm excited for all the stories that are going to be told.
You are my very first guest, and I thank you so much for joining me. All right.
Very cool.
So, the story that you'd like to tell today,
Mhm.
where did it take place?
It took place in Japan, specifically in Kyoto.
Kyoto. All right. Now,
Mhm.
if I recall, Kyoto is between um, Tokyo and uh, my favorite city, Fukuoka.
Yeah, kind of. It's sort of in the south, I want to say the southwest part of Japan. So
Okay.
it's close to Osaka and Nara and Kobe and like places like that.
All right.
Mhm.
And when did this take place?
This story took place last summer. So last summer I went to, nope, sorry, it took place 3 summers ago. 3 summers ago, I went to Japan just to do a really quick, like, uh, just to see everything I could see in one trip. So I
Sure.
just slept on night buses and night trains and went every possible city I could in like a 2 week period because that was all that I could afford at the time, to be honest. So I just did that. And then I went back last year and spent just 2 months there just writing. So that was fun. But this story is from 2 years ago. So that would have been, sorry, 3 years ago because it's 2020. So
Okay.
2017.
Well,
2017.
let me ask you this. So you said that you were traveling on a budget. Now, when I
Yeah, I was.
traveled when I traveled on a budget between Korea and Japan, I traveled by ferry.
Mm-hmm.
It was very cheap.
Mm-hmm.
It took about three
Mm-hmm.
hours to get from Busan to Fukuoka. Um,
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
how did you get there?
I actually flew because it was
Okay.
cheaper and it took less time. So I was also limited in my time. So I only had like 2 weeks and I could only figure out how to budget like within maybe 8, 9 days of time plus flight time and travel time. So I didn't want to take the ferry. Also, I've been to Fukuoka, but I didn't want to start in Fukuoka. I wanted to start in Osaka and bus from there. So I did. Mhm.
All right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you arrive in Kyoto.
Yes. So at the time, this was towards the end of my trip. I started in Osaka and I went to all of these really unusual places. I went to Shizuoka. I went to Hiroshima on that trip.
Oh
I went
yeah.
to Osaka. I went to Kyoto. I went to Kobe. I was all over that province. And then I went over all the way to Shizuoka to try and see Mount Fuji from the south side. I didn't actually get to do that, but I did get to spend a nice day on the waterfront there and the beaches and see a friend of mine who I think you know, who is living in Japan now. So yeah. So I arrived in Kyoto at the tail end of that trip. I think I had 3 days left. I was going to go to Kyoto, and then the next morning I was going to Hiroshima, and then I was going to come back to Osaka and fly out. So it's the very end of the trip. I was tired. You know how when you've been traveling in uncomfortable circumstances for a long time?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
like I was sleeping on buses and cleaning up in onsens, and like occasionally I would get like a hostel or something. So I was just, kind of wandering the roads and living out of a backpack for a week and a half. And at that point, I was pretty dragged out. And I don't speak Japanese. I speak this much Japanese, but I didn't speak any at all at the time. And I was just sort of, it was beginning to get to that point where it was overwhelming and not enjoyable.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. So you're in
Mm-hmm.
Kyoto,
Mm-hmm.
and let's see, how was the weather at that time?
It was nice. It was the summer, so it was humid, but it was the story I'm about to tell took place sort of in the evening. So
Okay.
it was cooling down. It was just a nice summer night. It was a nice summer night. Mm-hmm.
Great. All right. A nice summer night in Kyoto.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
there.
Okay.
All right.
So the story starts at Kyoto Station. I had just taken, I had taken the night bus in the night before, and I had gone to an onsen that day and scrubbed up and cleaned up. And then I had gone to like a museum or something, and then I went back to Kyoto Station, which is very big and very beautiful. But I was waiting for the night train to take me to Hiroshima. No, sorry, I was going to wait overnight and then get the first train leaving the station, going to Hiroshima the next morning. And I was hungry was really hungry. I hadn't had dinner yet. It was sort of early evening, and I hadn't really explored the area around the station. I stayed in a hostel called Book and Bed, which is basically just a lot of bookshelves. It's a big library with beds inside the shelves. You kind of slide the bookshelf back and you sleep in there. So I'd stayed in there when I first got to Kyoto, and I didn't want to go back there. I just wanted to kind of hang out overnight in the area and see what I could see because it was a different kind of place.
Yeah.
So I started walking just sort of in any random direction to kind of get away from the station and see what I could find to eat. Because there's loads of restaurants near the station, but I didn't want something super, super touristy. So I started walking. By the way,
Touristy would be like,
well, like McDonald's or like one of those places that where, that you walk in and they kind of flip the menu over to the English side where the prices are all like 3 yen more. All right. I didn't want that. So I realized as I'm telling this story, there was a lot more thought that went into it than just, I'm going to walk around at night in Kyoto. I planned the trip a lot more than this. I'm just trying to give you the bare bones of the idea. I wasn't just wandering the world as a woman alone. It wasn't a good idea. But so I was walking away from the station, and I don't even know where I was going. I didn't have any idea. I just kind of started walking. And as I'm walking, the first thing I see, I got maybe half a mile away, and I stopped seeing other tourists. It was just Japanese people. And I was like, okay, I'm on the right track. But nothing looked like a commercial district. It started to look real warehousey.
yeah.
So as I'm walking, I kind of see all of this. And then I see there's like a little open, kind of an open concrete lot. And on that lot, there's a market. So I go to walk into the market. I'm like, oh, there's a market. I can totally find something to eat. And I look, and it apparently was some kind of like open air summer, like food truck kind of thing. But remember, I don't speak Japanese at all. So I'm walking through there and I'm just thinking, and nothing was really calling to me. Nothing seemed super delicious to me. I was just like, okay. The only thing that even seemed a little interesting was there was a guy who was grilling conch shells, which I didn't even know you could eat until that point, the conch inside. I guess you can, but I didn't know you could. And he was grilling them on this huge open grill made out of half of an oil barrel. And he was like, and I was looking like, wow, that's interesting. And they smelled really good, like this really salty, meaty smell. But I didn't know how to ask if I could, I didn't even know how to like ask how much they cost or if I could buy one. Like my Japanese was completely non-existent. Stupid move, but it was completely non-existent, right?
Oh
so as I'm standing there looking at this guy, he's like asking me all these questions in Japanese, and I'm just like, right? But he's, kind of pointing, and I just don't know how to even like, I don't know anything. And then he kind of, he's nice about it. Japanese people are generally very polite to strangers. And he was nice about it, but he was kind of like, okay, she has no idea what's going on. And he was, talking to other people. And I'm standing there thinking, well, crap, this was not a good idea. I don't know how to eat. And I didn't have data on my phone, and I hadn't downloaded a dictionary, so I didn't have anything to translate.
So
I was just kind of, I was
out of luck.
Look, I was traveling old school style. I was traveling the way we used to back before we had the internet, right? So, so and I was just kind of, I didn't know what to do, but I turned around and I saw that on this building looked completely like a warehouse when you were walking to it and past it. But on the backside, there were 2 little restaurants set into the back of this building, and this big warehouse looking building that was across the street from the market. So I'd walked past it and hadn't seen that there were restaurants there. And when I turned around, I saw there were 2 lines going into restaurants. Now, you lived in Asia, you know what it's like. If you see a place that has lines of people going in, get in that line, right?
Yes.
So, right? So I walk over there and I look at one place, and they both seem to have noodles, but one was more interesting to me because one just had like all the same kind of people, just like young Japanese couples, like in the line. And I thought that's probably trendy, but maybe it's not good. Maybe it's just social media. Like people are eating this for the gram. And the other line though had kind of every kind of Japanese person you could ever imagine in this line. It was like an old person, a young couple, a guy in a postman's uniform, like every type of Japanese person you could find was in this line, right? And I thought, okay, let me get in that line. I get in the line, and as I'm waiting, the line's actually moving really quickly. I get up to the front of the line, and I notice they've got the menu, but I noticed something interesting. They have those menus where the front side is in Japanese and the back side is in English, and the English side has higher prices than the Japanese side. But this place, the prices were the same on both sides. So I thought, oh, that's nice, right? And I looked, and it was ramen, like traditional Japanese ramen. Like all these different broths and things. But you know how restaurants in Asia are often pretty simple? They usually only serve 1 or 2 things. This place just serve ramen with different kinds of broth. So I
Yeah.
thought, okay, I can handle that. I can do ramen. I can do different kinds of broth. That's what I'm going to order. So I picked out what I wanted. And then there was a guy who was coming in and out, and he surprised me because he spoke English. He comes out and he's like in one of those giant rubber aprons and gum boots, and he's got a towel on his head. And he
Yes.
goes, oh, and he has kind of this sing-songy cadence that I kind of associate with Japanese people who have learned English on their own, where it's not like a native speaker cadence, but it's totally understandable. It's just a very Japanese accent. He
Okay.
comes out and he says to me, just one person. And I said, yeah, just one. And I said, okay, come in. And I come in and it's like this tiny little place. Like do you see how where I'm sitting here and then to the back of the room,
Yeah.
double that. And that was the size of the whole eating area of this
Right.
place. And then of course on one side, there's a kitchen. Now I'm traveling by myself, and I like to travel by myself because I really like to people watch. This was the perfect place to people watch because, again, every kind of Japanese person you can imagine is sitting in here. Now you speak more Japanese than I do. You probably would have had a really different experience, I
I
think.
might
Yeah.
speak
Mhm.
five more. I might have five more phrases.
It would have helped you immensely because I was lost, right? So I sit down and I remember I ordered the shoyu ramen because it was like a light, because the way it was described was light half soy sauce. And I thought I can do half soy sauce. Okay. So I sit down and order my food, and it's one of those places where they just sit you wherever there's an empty seat, like even if there's somebody else already at that table, because it was so crowded and so popular. So I sit down, and while I'm waiting for my food, I'm kind of scoping out the place. Now, I have to describe to you the people who were working there really quickly, right? Because it's
Okay.
four guys, and they were all really interesting. I was kind of giving them nicknames in my head. So first there was the boss. He's the guy who let me in. Spoke a little English. He had like this impeccable memory. He's pulling people in. Okay, two people, you guys sit there. One person, you sit there with that guy. He's managing everything. He's running orders back and forth, doing everything. Then there's glasses has massive thick glasses, and he's standing just behind the counter, and
Right.
he's just perpetually grumpy, and his whole job is to run the meat slicer that is
Okay.
slicing up this meat that they put in this ramen. But I don't know how he can see what he's doing because this is a ramen shop. Everything is boiling in the back in the kitchen,
And
right?
he has this
Everything is steamy,
glass.
and his glasses are just steamed up, and he's just this frown and steamed up glasses and running this meat slicer,
Wow.
frowning at everybody, right, over the counter, over the half counter. Then there's Boots. I noticed him because his boots were a different color than everybody else. And he's standing there, and his whole job was to do the noodles. He's putting together all the soup in the order. He'd pull together a bowl, he'd plop it here, glasses, throw some meat in it. The boss would bring it out to whoever it belonged to,
We
right?
got
I don't even know
boss,
how they're keep. So we got the
boss,
boss,
glasses,
glasses,
boots.
and Boots.
Okay.
Fourth guy. I called him handsome because
Okay.
he was. He was way off in the back washing dishes. And even when he was way in the back, and all I can see is like the back of his head and a quarter profile, he got the name handsome just from that. This man looked like the edge of a knife, just that really sharp, really pretty kind of look that a lot of Asian men have, right? And I couldn't figure out, why is this man washing dishes in the back of a ramen shop, right? I
Okay.
mean, he just looks amazing, and he's just like sprinkling glitter across every dish he washes. He's just this gorgeous man. Young though, like maybe 22, 23, super young, right?
Well, that's why
Anyway,
he's back there. He's too
of
young.
course. Yeah, of course. But I mean, just why is he even working in a ramen shop to begin with? He looked like he should be on the cover of magazines, right?
Ah.
I mean, just beautiful looking person. So I'm watching these four guys. They're running this ramen shop. The boss is running the orders. Glasses and Boots are putting them together. Handsome is running up in front, and he's pulling the dishes from where they're being placed on the counter and pulling them back and washing dishes and putting them where they go. Now, I finally get my food, and as I'm eating, like behind me is the line of people who are coming in, right, waiting for a seat. And I'm sitting with my back to the door, but facing into the restaurant, which is why I can see how the whole thing is working, right? And this one big table all of a sudden frees up in the back of the restaurant against the wall. And I had kind of glanced over my shoulder before and saw that there was a whole family there waiting, right? It was kind of a strange family, though. It was like three people my age and a little girl about 10, right? And you could tell that maybe two of them were brother and sister because they looked a lot alike. And then maybe the other woman was somebody's wife, and then the little girl was somebody's kid, right?
Okay. All right.
So there's this family sitting here, and they're kind of behind me, and they just look like a happy family, right? I kind of saw them over my shoulder. I go back to eating my noodles and watching folks work. And you know how sometimes you can feel joy coming off of people? You can just feel when people are suddenly really happy, right? all of a sudden I felt that coming from these people behind me, and I turn and I look, and it turns out that this family is deaf, and the boss knows a little bit of sign language.
Okay.
Right. So he walked up and started speaking to them, and when they spoke back, he spoke back in sign language, a little bit of sign language, not a lot, right? And and they got really happy. They were just so happy that they could communicate easily, or more easily, I think, right? So I just felt the joy coming off of them, and I thought, oh wow, okay, right? Anyway, he seats them at the table that's like straight ahead from where I can see. He seats them right at that table. And I'm kind of watching them as I'm eating, because this is interesting. I don't think I've ever seen, I don't see a lot of people with disabilities in Asia in general. And I've lived here for a long time at this point. You don't really see people with disabilities out and about. And so, and even though I know a lot of deaf people and people who can speak sign back in the States, I don't know anybody who can here in Asia, not where I live now in Korea, or when I visit Japan. And I've visited Japan a lot at this point. That was the first of many, many trips, right?
Okay.
So I was kind of surprised to see them, and I was sort of interested, and I know a little bit of American Sign Language, but I don't know any Japanese Sign Language, and I'm curious to know if any of it is familiar. And
It's
I
not
don't,
the same, is it? I
it's
don't.
not the same. Mm-mm.
Oh, right.
Yeah, everybody has their own, basically. There is like a international sign language, but nobody knows it. It's like Esperanto, right?
God.
Yeah. Um,
Wait.
and
What's
yeah.
Esperanto? I'm not. I'm familiar.
Ah, so Esperanto is this, like, it was an attempt at somebody creating, like fabricating an international language in, well, I don't know, I want to say the 40s, the 1940s. There was a scholar, a linguist who made it. But it was like, he was a European, and it's a very European sort of international language. It tries to mix things from different European languages to make an easy to learn international language.
Okay.
And it kind of has, there's people who are Esperanto hobbyists, but obviously nobody speaks it.
Wow.
It's a
Never.
nice idea, but
Okay.
it's not like a reality, right?
Okay.
English has, in the meantime, English has actually become the international language, right?
Right.
But speaking of English, so the boss can speak English, he can speak sign language. I'm wondering what else does this guy know, right? Because he's,
Wow.
running this place like a
Yes.
master, and he also is able to, he's really good at communicating, which I'm noticing. Anyway, this deaf family sits right in my sight line. So there's me, there's another table, and then there's like this deaf family sitting kind of off in the distance, like 2 or 3 tables away. And the way they sit, the little girl, she's about 10, is sitting facing me. And she's, like a 10-year-old little girl, like this chubby little girl who's just, like right on the cusp of like that kind of awkward childhood and like sort of preteen sort of years, right? She's just kind of elbows and knees and noodles up her nose. I mean, she's just a mess, right? But like in a little, really lovable kid kind of way, right? So she's having a great time. And I noticed at some point they need something.
Hmm.
And I don't, and like they're trying to get the attention of the boss, and I'm wondering, like, should I call him? I don't know what to do. And Handsome glides out from behind the counter where he's washing dishes and brings them what they need.
Wow.
And then he stops and he has a whole conversation with them. Handsome is deaf.
Oh.
And I noticed that because I noticed that the boss was talking to everybody else, but not to him. And I was like, gosh. So I was wondering what the dynamic was, because just from using only my eyes and my lack of Japanese language, it seemed like everybody was kind of shunning him. Nobody was speaking to him really. They were just kind of throwing dishes in a pile back at him. And nobody was really talking to him. And the boss would go back there, but I couldn't see what he was doing. And it didn't look like he was saying anything. But
It seemed kind of cruel that they were just.
Exactly, but that wasn't it. He just can't hear, right?
Right.
So the boss was communicating with him a little bit in sign, and he could clearly lip read, but he was deaf. So he comes out, and he has a little conversation with them. He brings them what they need, and then he goes away. Now, as he goes away, I see him pass by, and this little girl, this little deaf girl, has fallen in love. She has decided that this is the man she is going to marry at the age of 10 years old.
Oh wow! So
right.
he was so handsome. This isn't just your opinion. This is a general opinion.
I think so. And it wasn't just that he was handsome. It was also that he was young and he's deaf too.
Yes.
Right. And they didn't know. They didn't know that I don't think these people, they just seemed so surprised and so grateful that people were able to speak with them. It really made me think, I don't know what the accommodations are like for deaf people in Japan at all.
Okay.
They're not always good in the US, and we pride ourselves on our diversity in our accommodations for people of difference. Well, we can make that face
Yeah,
of each other more later. But, you know, we pride ourselves on that. And and the accommodations for deaf people are not very good. I don't know what they're like in Japan at all. I can't say that they're good or bad. I really don't know anything. But this family, they just seem so surprised and so grateful and so joyous that people were able to speak to them. I can't imagine what it's like to go out for a simple family dinner on a Friday night and not know if it's going to be stressful to communicate or not. Like, I know how I felt just knowing that the boss could speak a little bit of English and help me figure out my ramen order, right? And I also knew that in 2 days I was going to be back somewhere where I can speak the language and that wasn't going to be an issue. Right. I can't imagine what it's like to feel that way
and
all
for
the time.
And for that family, just as any other family, you know, we would become restless, and we want variety in our lives. So we want to try other foods, and we don't want to be relegated to just that one restaurant with those people. So
Exactly.
they were taking a risk when they entered that restaurant, and serendipitously.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, exactly. That felt very serendipitous. And of course, this is all conjecture. I was just watching and just going by body language and tone of voice and just looking at the expression on this little girl's face when this beautiful guy comes out of the kitchen and hands her this box of tissues that she needs and turns out to be deaf too, right? Like, I just saw just the shock, the surprise, the absolute adoration on this little girl's face. You can tell they weren't expecting it, right? But it's a simple story, and I wanted to tell it because it's sweet. But you know,
there's nothing simple about it. It's sweet, and it is wow, it's heartwarming. You know, and it's wonderful that you noticed all of these details, and you were able to share that. I'm glad that you were able to share the story with me.
Yeah, I mean, it really had an impact on me because, you know, when you're traveling alone, sometimes it can be really, it can be lonely, right? Even if you like to travel alone, it can be isolating because, especially when you're traveling somewhere where you don't really speak the language, and it's rare to meet people who speak your language, even if you are staying in like more international places. And what mitigates that for me, that kind of feeling of isolation, if I'm traveling somewhere unfamiliar alone, is I look for connections. I love to people watch, and I love to people watch and I love to see people when they see people that they really love or people that they really appreciate. Like, I love to people watch in airports and train stations and things like that, because you get to see all these reunions. You get to see friends and lovers and family see each other, some maybe for the first time in a long time. And it's a beautiful thing to watch. And I mean, I try really hard not to be creepy about it. I know that maybe it sounds like I was being creepy, like eating my noodles, like, oh, look at this little girl. But, right? But there's something really beautiful in seeing other people connect, right? Even if you're not a part of that connection. And I mean, I sat there and I kind of peeked over the rim of my bowl and watched this little girl call for every possible thing she could think of to get Handsome to come to the table and talk to her the whole time. And then, I finished my bowl of noodles and I paid and I left and I said thank you to the boss. But it was just such a nice night in a way. That family, this was years ago, and I still think of that family sometimes, right? Sure. And think, like, I wonder if that little girl, because she was maybe 10 then, she's 13 now. She's got maybe 4 more years before she can go back and find her man. So, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know.
That was an excellent story. Thank you for retelling it. And I think that in retelling it, you were able to travel back to Kyoto and that moment.
Yeah. And the noodles were good too.
That's okay. Honestly, I would like a little bit more details about the noodles. Conch shells, was it?
Well, it was ramen noodles in a soy sauce based broth, the kind that come with like slices of beef in it. And I like Japanese food, but I'm not exactly a connoisseur. I can't describe to you exactly what it was. Honestly, the noodles, I remember that they were good, but they were the least notable thing about that night.
Yes.
Yeah. They were tasty. Yeah, it was just like wheat noodles in a soy broth with beef. And I remember actually at one point this businessman sat across, because I was sharing the table with whoever was coming. When I sat down, it was some student, like some skinny guy who just like ate all his noodles in 4 seconds and disappeared. And then the next guy to sit down was like a businessman in like a shirt and tie. And he put like half a can, you know how they put bonito flakes on your table? to eat with your ramen.
Yes.
And they curl up in the heat and they look like they're alive. He put like half a can of bonito flakes on top of his ramen when it came, and I was almost done. And I just remember looking at his whole bowl like wiggling and creeping. I'm like, that's not, I guess he likes it. Right? But yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, share with us, let's see, in addition to our meeting in 2013 at the Black History Month Festival, where I can't pronounce his name, but Sam Okeri, I think it is.
Ochiri.
Ochiri, okay, from Ghana, there.
Yeah. He's super famous now.
Right. And so I believe, according to my memory, that's when we first met. But then we also met later at a book event.
Yes. So there was a bookstore, a used English language bookstore in Daegu called By the Book. And
Sandy.
I think, Sandy, exactly.
Yeah.
It's closed now. They've gone back to Canada, I think. But yeah, so I think we met at By the Book. I wrote a chapter in a book about Black women's experiences in Asia about 1 million years ago.
I wonder, would you happen to have a copy of that book somewhere?
Well, I don't know. Do I? Bam! Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I do actually. Yeah, this was a setup. Larry made me go get the book. But yeah, actually I did my bookshelf today and here we go. Yeah, so I was in this book Trailblazing, and that's part of how we first met. I wrote a chapter about living in Korea, and I had just gotten to Korea in those days. That book is really good though. There's women from all across Asia, from India, Indonesia, Japan, Korea, China, who write about their experiences as women, as Black women in Asia, because I think we're kind of invisible in the public consciousness here in a lot of ways. People don't expect to see us. And when people do expect to see us, they expect us to be in like these kind of easy to understand media forced packages. And I've never met a Black woman who fit that description in Asia. Well, anywhere really, but especially not in Asia, you know? So it was interesting. It was an interesting experience. And I remember meeting you there. And we hung out a lot, actually. I remember when we were both working at universities in Korea. I was having an issue at my university at the time, and I called you to whine on your shoulder from a distance about how mean everybody was. So yeah, and I remember that really vividly. Thank you for that. I don't know if I ever did say thank you, but you helped me kind of stick out the course.
That's cool. You definitely handle yourself very well, so I didn't have to help that much.
You helped, definitely, trust me. But yeah.
So Mel, we're gonna end this session of our storytelling journey. Amazing stories, Black Travel Edition, and our guest today was Melissa Watkins from Denver, Colorado, and I'm your host, Larry. I go by Larry Legend, and this is The Legend Continuing.
Excellent. Thank you, Larry Legend. Peace.
Peace.